Hello, Stand Up Michigan followers. Hello, citizens and Michigan patriots. Thank you so much for joining us today. Tammy Clark here, Executive Director with Stand Up Michigan, and Ron Armstrong, our co-founder.
Great to be here, Tammy, and we got some incredible guests with us today, and hopefully this signal is coming through. We've had a little bit of technical difficulties, but we think we got it cleared up. So go ahead, Tammy, do some introductions.
Yeah, so I would like to introduce all of you to three of our House representatives. We have with us today Luke Meerman, we have Steve Johnson, and Graham Filler. And I just want to say thank you to the three of you. I know you guys have been busy campaigning. It is a busy time for you guys to step away and to agree to join us on our Stand Up Michigan page for an interview and for some information, to provide some information to the citizens and followers at Stand Up Michigan who've been really bombarding us with a lot of questions and things like that. So I really appreciate the three of you taking some time out of your busy campaigning schedule to talk with the citizens, many of them your constituents. So just first of all, I want to introduce Luke. Luke Meerman is with the, well, Luke, I met you actually in Grand Haven. You were on stage at our Grand Haven event, and I wanted to say thank you for that. That's the first time I met you. You were Polkton Township trustee, elected in 2012. You were serving your first term in the House of Representatives, if that's correct. And
Yes.
What district are you with, Luke?
88th District.
The 88th District, so you're in Ottawa County. Okay. And you sit on the very important Ways and Means Committee. You are also a fifth generation farmer. So there are a lot of people out there that are going to relate with you and to you, especially in Ottawa County, right? I grew up in Ottawa County myself, in Hudsonville. So I know there are a lot of farmers and there are a lot of rural, I think, constituents that can relate with your background. So thank you very much and I know you're out there campaigning. Thank you very much for being with us today. Then we have Steve Johnson with the 72nd District. And of course, Steve sits on the very important Judicial Committee that these bills have all gone through, right? So, and you were a part of all four of these bills. You were, I think, named as a sponsor in all four of them. So sitting on the Judicial Committee obviously is a very important committee as well. Tell me a little bit about your background. What did you do before you were elected, and how long have you been with the legislature?
Yep, in my second term here, prior to this, I was in the U.S. Air Force, did nuclear missile maintenance, got out of there, did a little bit of construction work, and then ran for the legislature. So here in my second term on the Judiciary Committee, I was a co-sponsor on all those bills, was there for all the testimony on them. So excited to be here to kind of walk people through exactly what they do.
Great. Well, thank you for your service. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. And I know you're taking a lot of time out of your busy campaigning schedule as well. So thank you, Steve. And Graham, I really didn't have a lot of time. This was thrown together very quickly. You and I spoke late Friday evening, and I thank you very much for taking my call and for taking the time on a Friday evening, going into the holiday weekend of all things, to talk with me and to agree to come on and be willing to be interviewed. So because this was all thrown together very quickly over the weekend, I just haven't had time to get a bio from you. So would you please let our listeners know, first of all, what is the district that you represent? How long have you been with the legislature, and what was your background?
Sure. This is my first term in the legislature. It's the House District 93. That's St. John's, DeWitt, Ithaca. A lot of agriculture, a lot of hunters. And right next to Lansing, I'm the chair of the House Judiciary Committee. And along with Rep. Meerman and Rep. Johnson, we've worked on some really big issues. And I think, Tammy, one of the most important things to talk about, something you mentioned to me, which is we want people to go out and vote. We want them to be active, and we want them to be informed. And if this helps out in some manner, then we feel like we're doing our job. So thanks for having us on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule as well to be with us. So, okay, thank you guys. I really appreciate the time. I appreciate that despite the fact that I have given you some hard questions to look at and to study and to prepare some answers for, you're still here and you're with us, and I appreciate that. So let's get into it. First of all, I would like for you all to explain to everybody that is listening the reasoning for this four-bill package. Everybody is really kind of focused on one of the bills, and that is House Bill 6032, which we will get into in detail. But would you guys please just take a minute and explain to us, why is this a four-bill package? And then I'll break down the bills and we'll discuss them individually.
Sure, I can start. At the start of summer, we started having discussions with the business community. And when we talk about the business community, and you'll see who supported the bill, we're talking from the biggest of the big to the smallest. And basically, everyone wanted liability protections. And this isn't a get out of jail free card or anything like that for businesses. This is to say there was a ton of fear, and still is, that if an individual claims they got COVID at somebody's business and then is allowed to sue, and the business has no protections, then businesses are going to go bankrupt, especially small businesses. But you could imagine if somebody came in at a really large business and said, hey, I think I got COVID here. And then after a jury trial, they said, okay, we can't really prove it, but there's $1 million. And then that opens the floodgates for trial lawyers. And so we put together a package along with the Michigan Chamber, Small Business Association, basically everybody involved in business, that would give some protections for employees and employers across the board. And if you want to talk about sort of how we work in the legislature, we've done this for 1.5 years. We've been remarkably successful at putting together bill packages and getting them through a governor who is kind of inclined to veto anything at any time. And so I view this as a success, a remarkable success. And so that's sort of the genesis of the legislation. I don't know if Rep. Johnson or Rep. Meerman wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, I'll just add briefly, this was brought out of a lot of people worried that some person goes into a business, claims that they contracted COVID there, and now they can go ahead and sue. And it's not so much whether they go to court and they actually get a verdict. That what happens with a lot of small businesses is they have to settle because they can't afford to go through the long, drawn-out court process. It takes months, sometimes years. And so what the trial lawyers do, and that's a strategy of theirs, is they know that no one's going to actually take them all the way to the end, so they just start suing people left and right, and they just hope people settle. Whether or not their case is strong, they're hoping, hey, let's just get something that we can get a settlement, and they walk away with a lot of money. And so what this did was to try to limit that, make it easier to get these lawsuits, frivolous lawsuits, dismissed.
Okay, Luke, do you want to add anything?
And I'll just add in there, I think it's important to note who was against this, and that was the trial lawyers and many other liberal organizations. In fact, the governor wouldn't move our direction until the Supreme Court ruled in our favor, so that we had some leverage over her and were able to force this upon her. She didn't want these.
Yeah, the Michigan Senate actually went and took a little bit of an unprecedented step. After these bills passed out of the House, they tie-barred this package to unemployment benefits to sort of use, or at least put it out there that, hey, if the governor was going to veto this package, then she'd also have to veto unemployment benefits, which were universally popular in the legislature on both Dem and Republican sides and in the public too. And so they really pressured her using legislative tactics, and eventually that did lead to the bills being passed and becoming law.
So basically, the reason and the impetus behind these bills, and people will see if they just hang with us for a few minutes, they're going to see why there are four bills, because some of these bills are actually just updates to the Michigan Occupational Safety and Health Act, and they they add some definitions, basically. So it's not like this long, comprehensive bill. I'm going to break that down in just a minute. So I want people to hang with me and understand why there are four bills. And they all had to be passed simultaneously in order for all of this to take effect, correct?
Right. If one bill doesn't get passed, then they all fall. So that's just how this worked. If you look at the end of the bill that says this only goes into effect if those three other bills are signed.
And that's because some of the bills individually basically are just adding some definitions about COVID that never existed before to the Michigan Occupational Safety and Health Act. And so I will break that down in a minute. Yeah.
We don't want the governor to cherry pick what she wants and throw away what we need for business protections.
Right. So the impetus behind this, what I think is very important for people to hear, is that the business community came to the legislature and said, we are very concerned because we are wide open to lawsuits from COVID. And this is what I was saying, because I am a business consultant. I am actually health, my background before I got involved with Stand Up Michigan, my background is health, safety, and compliance consulting. So one of the things that I was saying to my clients, because I was trying to direct them through all of this, right? With the compliance part of complying with COVID, which is new. One of the things that I was saying to them is their concern was, what if one of our employees sues us for getting COVID? And the one thing that I was telling them all the time was, there is no way in the world anybody can prove they got COVID at your workplace. You can't prove where you pick up a virus. However, one of the things that is very concerning that I think people in the state of Michigan need to understand when they're considering the bills that you guys just passed is that MIOSHA, Michigan OSHA, has been very busy lately. If you noticed, I think we're up to like 38 or 39 worker deaths now in the state of Michigan. They have been very busy attributing a lot of deaths to COVID in the workplace, which opens all businesses up now to liability for somebody saying, I got COVID at the workplace. If you read these Michigan OSHA deaths that they're claiming have been COVID in the workplace, the very first one started out with an elderly man who had not been at work for a couple of weeks and started getting symptoms. And Michigan OSHA actually listed this death as a COVID-19 workplace death. And so you can see how this would open up all employers to liability from, if MIOSHA is saying that this person died from COVID and they listed it as a workplace death, well, then you can see how employers are going to be opened, and attorneys would be salivating over this. And so basically what you're telling us is that's the impetus behind these bills, to protect the employers from this type of liability, correct?
That's right. And I'd also like to mention the compromise aspect of this. I know people reach out to Tammy and tell her, well, and to me personally too, the legislature doesn't do anything. And, you know, this is a common refrain, and we understand that sometimes if you're out there and you're not on the ground in Lansing all the time, you don't see the back and forth. If we had passed the 6030 and 6031 and 6101 by themselves, they just would have got vetoed, and they would have been attacked as a handout to businesses. And, you know, we have a very political governor that we work with on a daily basis. And so is 6032 our favorite bill in the package? No. But as we've done for the past year, we pass compromise legislation so we can get something done in the state of Michigan. And so this is actually a really good example of that. And so it's probably good that people learn about them.
Yeah, and I want to get into that because that one is, of course, not my favorite either, and I'm actually kind of upset about it with a lot of the other citizens in Michigan. So let me just start by breaking these bills down individually, if you guys don't mind, and then we'll discuss them. There's not a lot to talk about, to be honest, with 6030, 6031, or 6101, but it's 6032 that we're going to spend a little bit of time on, and these are the questions that people really have. So first of all, let's start with House Bill 6030. It was introduced by Representative Thomas Albert on July 8th, and all of these were introduced on the same day, right, July 28th, because this was a collective package, but they were introduced by different representatives. I do believe that they were sponsored by all of the same representatives, except Ryan Berman, which is interesting. I noticed he was not on 6032. And I have not been successful in contacting him to ask him why, but they were sponsored by the same group of legislators, quite a few of you actually. So 6030, the yay votes were 86, nay votes were 15, and there was a no vote absent of 8. This bill is known as COVID-19 Response and Reopening Liability Assurance Act. So this was a bill to provide minimum requirements for tort claims. And this is something that I just have a question on. Why? Why would you reduce the minimum requirement for an employee and the tort requirements for an employee to sue their employer? That's the big why on that one. Would somebody like to take that one and explain why there are minimum requirements?
Yep. So I think that's one of my main issues with some of the criticisms is that if you read the bills in a silo and you don't actually consider what the existing framework out there is, they actually look very problematic.
Yeah.
And so it looks like, all right, now you're opening up employers to being sued in a way that they couldn't have been sued at some other point.
Oh, we lost you, Steve.
I knew we lost his picture, so he'll probably join back up.
He'll probably
Can
pop
one
back
of you-
up there.
Can one
I'm
of you
sorry.
pick up?
This was 6030 that you're referencing, Tammy?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so currently in the state of Michigan, there's a negligence standard for when you sue somebody. So the situation you're looking at is, Joe Smith goes into work, claims they got COVID at their place of work, and then files a lawsuit. And it's not that they would have to prove really anything more than negligence. Well, they made me come in during COVID times. It's not a good time to work. I hope the judge sides with me. So we want to raise that standard to protect businesses. And so what this does is protect businesses, which if Joe Smith can't show in his initial filing that the business did anything wrong. So essentially the business was following all state, local, and national guidelines, then the business would just file a motion for summary disposition and say, hey, we followed all the health guidelines out there. We can't be sued from this individual who got COVID. And so it's a business liability protection bill. That's 6030. And what it does is it creates a little bit of a hump that you have to jump over. So it's trying to slow down the flood of lawsuits that may follow throughout COVID times.
Well, and that's one of the things that Ron and I, both as business owners, were talking about, how the language within these bills, we feel is going to just pit employee against employer and just clog up the legal system with all of these. So that was a concern. With there are minimum requirements now for tort claims alleging exposure to COVID-19, but it also establishes liability standards for claims alleging exposure to COVID-19 and precluding liability if conduct complies with the regulation of orders. And so we're going to get into that in just a minute. What are the COVID health violations? So this is the very first bill in the package that was introduced to establish some liability standards. And the concern with this one for me is why does it reduce? Why are there minimum requirements for tort claims alleging COVID exposure? That one was a big one that a lot of people and I myself had questions on.
I'm a little bit confused by the question regarding 6030. So this makes it harder for people to sue businesses. That's what 603 does. 6030 does. Is there miscommunication?
No, the language of the bill actually establishes liability, but it reduces the tort claims, the tort claim requirements, which was just a question because as Ron and I were talking about this, when you take this collectively, it will pit employee against employer with those minimum, the reduction in the tort requirements. But then there is the added liability claim. There is a hump that, like you said, you've got to jump over because there are some liability requirements that must be met in order to claim exposure to COVID-19. So I get that. It was just the question of the minimum tort requirements. Why were they reduced?
Steve, you want to try to finish that? You got cut off about one sentence in.
Sorry about that, Steve. We lost you. You must be driving.
Yeah, no, hopefully I got better service here. So yeah, I don't know where you guys lost me there, but it's been portrayed as we have lowered the standards being to sue. That it's actually easier to sue an employer. That's not the case. I get where it's not explicitly written down in state statute. Right.
Tammy, can you mute yourself?
Employer.
Tammy, mute yourself. You're tapping on your keyboard.
Just sue for these same issues. So by actually explicitly putting this into law, we did limits out there. So now there's actually, you are less liable to a lawsuit than you were before. Now, if you read that and you say, hey, I'm liable for a lawsuit, and what I'm reading, this looks really bad. The unfortunate thing is, you were already liable for a lawsuit prior to this bill. And I don't like that. That's not good, but that's the political realities of what we're dealing with. And this bill got us closer to more protections for employers.
From a COVID-specific claim, correct?
Can
Correct.
each of you mute who isn't talking, just so we don't hear your keyboard going? Because it's been clicking pretty good.
And it may be Steve too, because he's traveling.
Yeah.
Don't go off the road, Steve. I can see you in your car. Okay. All right. So let's jump into House Bill number 6031. This bill was introduced by Tommy Brand, and I spoke with him about this particular bill, again, on July 23rd. It was sponsored by all of the same, I'm not sure who that is, or the clicking, actually. It might be a StreamYard thing, I'm not sure. It was sponsored by all of the same, basically this was a collective sponsorship between these House representatives. But this was an amendment to the MIOSHA Act, the Michigan Occupational Safety and Health Act, so I want to read it. So the amendment was by adding Section 85. We added a new section to the Michigan Occupational Safety and Health Act, which states, the people of the state of Michigan enact Section 85. Notwithstanding any other provision of this act, an employer is not liable under this act for an employee's exposure to COVID-19 if the employer was operating in compliance with all federal, state, and local statutes, rules, and regulations, executive orders, and agency orders related to COVID-19 that had not been denied legal effect at the time of the exposure, which we now know those executive orders have been denied legality, correct? An isolated de minimis deviation from strict compliance with such statutes, rules, regulations, executive orders, and agency orders unrelated to the employee's exposure to COVID-19 does not deny employer the immunity provided in this section. So basically, what this does is add Section 85 to the MIOSHA Act that allows the employer to be excluded from liability if the employer was working to meet following federal, state, local, and city compliance requirements, basically, related to COVID-19. My concern with this one is what are the rules related to COVID-19, since we know the executive orders now have been declared illegal. They have no standing, they're gone. And we know that the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services is operating outside of their legal scope, what they're allowed to do. So what is it exactly, the rules that an employer is going to be held to follow in order to preclude them from liability?
And whoever wants to take that, make sure you unmute yourself. There you go, Luke.
So if I could jump in and start with that, I have not liked anything that the governor has been doing through executive orders, and now that's been thrown out. So I'm in agreement with maybe a majority of you out there. But the point is, again, we're in the world we live in today, and these are not going to be easy questions to sort through. But if we're going to get some liability protection for these businesses, we have to start somewhere. And just writing them in there, like Luke wants to see, or maybe other conservatives want to see, doesn't mean it's going to be made into law. So that's kind of where we start from in the world that we live in, and it's not an easy place to be. It's not an easy place for a legislature to be, but that's where we are when we try to get these business liabilities. And you're right, it's not an easy thing to determine what those businesses should or shouldn't be following. But without, frankly, this language that can get signed all the way through into law, there wouldn't be any liability protection for businesses, and I think we would be watching businesses disappear as they get sued.
Okay, thank you, Luke. Did you have something, Ron?
Well, I think I'm going to have a lot, I think, when we're done here. I think the biggest problem we have is that when we put in language that basically says following all local regulations, if a court was to deem right now that a health department was able to force all businesses to make everyone who comes in wear a mask, and we believe unconstitutionally that we believe it's unconstitutional. So in my business, we absolutely do not. And when people come in, they say, do you wear a mask? And we say no. The health department says we should be. So the question is, if an employee comes into my business and now says, I'm going to take you to court because I got COVID and nobody in your business is wearing masks, am I operating against the health department and am I liable? Those are some major serious issues, as well as it is if an employee was to feel, look, I'm wearing my mask, but you as an owner are not. And I'm saying you're not against the rules or regulations that are established. Now, we don't believe they're constitutional, but we believe in our minds this has opened the door to really, again, potentially pit both people that visit your businesses as well as employees with the ability to basically have an open option to say that we have to follow these health department illegal, unconstitutional regulations until a court says not to. And that is a big, big hurdle now for us as businesses versus simply saying none of us should be following these because they're unconstitutional. But we've now passed a law that basically says we have to follow them as an employer. And if we don't, we are liable. That is a major problem as a business owner, even if everyone who is in my business currently says, we agree with you and we're not bothered with these, for instance, masks or face coverings. So my question is, have we not in some ways created an opening because unfortunately, this is being treated as a law, these rules and regulations that the health departments are mandating on all of us as individuals and business owners.
So I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me, Tammy?
I can, yes.
Yeah, I
Okay.
just can't see Graham or Steve, so I'm not who is speaking.
Yeah, it's Rep Filler. Sorry. So how things have
Okay.
really operated in the past is we disagreed with the governor's executive orders, but they held the force of law while they were, while it was making its way through the court, just as it's going right now with MIOSHA and with MDHHS. So, that's nice that you can disagree, and some people do disagree with the constitutionality of these, but they are deemed unconstitutional when a court says. So, for instance, the example would be Ron's got a business. MIOSHA says, hey, you violated MIOSHA orders, which are the law right now. Ron says, I disagree with you. I don't think they're the law. So what is Ron's recourse right now? He can file a lawsuit. And so that's typically how we have fought back against some of the governor's executive orders. So we haven't opened up any sort of portal to things being legitimized. They just are where they are right now. So let me give you an example real quick. We reference local, state, and federal health guidelines in these bills, right? And so it's you can read it as sort of an at the time. So at the time of that claim, whatever the state, federal, local guidelines were, sort of take hold at that time. So that's how you can read the bills going forward. But nothing we've done, we passed this bill through the House and we worked on it when the governor's executive orders still held the force of law. Eventually, they didn't, and it opened up these bills to become law, which are better for businesses, frankly, everybody going forward. So when you claim something, you think it's unconstitutional, we may agree with you. Frankly, we probably do agree with you. And then you fight that battle in court. I mean, that's typically how the what's constitutional or unconstitutional gets played out.
Ron, do you want to add something?
Well, let's open up some things. I don't know why some of these things were put into 6032, which I deem as also as it's related to being unconstitutional, and I do believe that it opens things up in a very negative way and puts dollar amounts on damages, and I think that it does hurt us in a lot of ways. So let's go through that first, and then we'll answer questions.
So let's get into 6032, okay? And let's get into the detail, because this is really the one where everybody, business owners like Ron and myself have talked about this. Those that, agree with the Constitution and understand the constitutionality of our civil liberties really have the biggest beef with this one. So let's get into this one. House Bill 6032 also was, well, Graham, this was yours, right? You were the one that introduced this bill on July 28th. All the sponsors, same sponsors: Thomas Albert, Tommy Brand, Sue Aller, Michael Weber, Joseph Bellino, Steve Johnson, Luke Meerman. We have the two of you with us today: Brad Paquette, Julie Alexander, Bradley Slaw, Julie Kelly, James Lauer, Stephen Marino, Bo LaFave, Douglas Wozniak, Dare Rendon, Gregory Markkinen, Matt Maddock, Scott Single, Ann Bolin, Aaron Miller, Hank Valpel, Diana Farrington, and Ben Frederick. Like I said, all of this group of representatives sponsored all four of the bills, except we have the one state representative, let's see, which one was it? Who he was on all of these bills, but I thought it was really interesting. Ryan Berman, he was not on 6032. And I would love to have asked him about this one, but I didn't get a hold of him in time. So these bills all went into effect on October 28 collectively. They went into immediate effect as their individual public acts. This one is Public Act 238 of 2020. So let's get into the concerns about House Bill 6032, first of all. This is a bill to prohibit an employer from taking certain actions against an employee who does not report to work under certain circumstances related to COVID-19. To prohibit an employee from reporting to work under certain circumstances related to COVID-19. To prohibit discrimination and retaliation for engaging in certain activities, and to provide remedies. So let me just read through this. Section 1 has some definitions. Close contact is an important one to understand because close contact means being within approximate 6 feet of an individual for 15 minutes or longer. The other definition that I want to read, because I've gotten lots of questions about this one, is this does this act apply specifically to the public employment sector or the private employment sector? So the employer is a person or a state or local government entity that employs one or more individuals. And a person means an individual, partnership, corporation, association, or other legal entity. So no, this does not just apply to the public sector. This applies to the private sector as well. All right, so some of the questions that came up with this particular, I want to pull up my questions in a minute because I'm reading the people's questions here along with some of my own. I really just scribbled down the questions that came through to us. Number one is, why are there so many missing sections? People have said you guys can't count, can't do math. Why are there so many missing sections? This is the first one I want to start with on this. Was that just because the Senate gave it back to you and they took out some sections, or what happened there?
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, so that's a very common thing when you draft legislation is you keep open sections. So that way, if you ever want to do an amendment to add something in there, you don't have to go through and renumber all the sections below them. We do this with legislation all the time. When I first got to Lansing, I thought it was kind of strange. Like, hey, you're missing several sections here. They just leave things there so you can put in new stuff. Say 20 years down the road, they want to do an amendment. Instead of having to go through and renumber everything, you can just go ahead and put that in there. So that's just a drafting process.
So it leaves it open for future amendments, basically, is what you're saying.
It makes it easier for an amendment so you don't have to go through and renumber everything. It's just for making things simpler.
Okay. All right. Let me ask, okay, hang on a minute. I'm looking through my questions about this one. Okay, what was the reasoning behind listing health violations related to COVID-19? So basically you said that an employee can sue, make a claim against an employer for violating, quote, health violations related to COVID-19. But what are those health violations? Because they are not defined here. So these are not defined in the bill. So are we to assume that you are relying on the definitions of well, we now know the unconstitutional executive order, so that would be null and void. Those would be thrown out. What about the unconstitutional MDHHS orders or MIOSHA's revisionist emergency orders? Because both of these agencies are acting outside of their parameters right now. So is this what we are to rely on? If an employee is to go and sue their employer saying they are violating what you list in here as, quote, the health violations related to COVID, but those health violations are not defined, what are we relying on then as the health violations? Can you guys clarify that?
Okay, I'll take that one. And there are some things in the bill that I'm a fan of, and that would be one of them there. But I think it's important to note that had this bill not been passed, let's say someone had COVID symptoms and said, hey, I cannot go to work today because of that, and the employer fired that person for that. Prior to this bill, that employer would have been opened up to a massive lawsuit. Because of the Michigan negligence law out there already, if an employer was not following DC guidelines or DHHS rules, they would be liable for that lawsuit. I'm not saying I agree with that, but that is the current state of where we stand right now. By doing this law, we put in there what the principal symptoms of COVID were, what those requirements would be in order for an employee to sue an employer. We put some basic requirements that they would have to meet. Now, I don't necessarily agree with all of those, but this is more restrictive than it was prior to this. Prior to this legislation, it was completely open-ended to whatever some judge out there thought was right. And we've seen that with a lot of ridiculous lawsuits, right? You think of the McDonald's hot coffee, right? They put on their coffee's hot because someone spilled on themselves, they burned, they sued, they got millions. That's the craziness that we deal with in the court system. We need some better tort reform out there. Had we not done this legislation, it would have been completely open-ended for any COVID lawsuit related out there. And you'd have had small businesses having to settle left and right because they could have never gone all the way to a verdict at trial. And so I don't agree with everything that's in there. It put some basic requirements, it put limitations on what you could actually sue for.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. Okay, Luke, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'd like to bounce back to Ron, to your point about more exposure out there. Employees are going to be turning you in. That's currently today. That could happen today. Those employees have the ability to go to MIOSHA and report their employers. And so what we've done here is restricted that and put more boundaries around that, so it's not as open-ended or even up to the interpretation of MIOSHA going forward, like, hey, we're going to open it up to more employees, and here's your way of doing it. This at least puts some bumpers out there to limit what is currently there.
Well, I guess where I'm at is we go on into definitions, and I know that we're not going to go through all of them. People can read the bill. But when I see things like a stomach ache, abdominal pain, a sore throat, a headache as reasons for people not to come to work or reasons for them to stay home, I am telling you, no matter how good you think employees are, the fact is this is going to be abused at a level that is already difficult between an employer and employees. I mean, I'm forced to shut my business. I'm forced to again, just to give you guys a little background, my business is absolutely crushed. 34 years in business, 34 years. And I manufacture displays and exhibits for trade shows. Conventions are stopped. Trade shows are gone. Job fairs are over. Recruiting is done. We literally were forced on top of that to have to shut down. So during all that time, we get the PPP, we pay the people even though they can't work. We have to do it within 8 weeks. Of course, the money doesn't benefit us at all in the end. It goes on into the summer. We bring the people back, but they're being paid more money to stay home than they are if they came to work. We know that you guys didn't do all of this. What I'm saying is when government gets involved in running a business, it no longer becomes a business. It becomes everything run by the government. And that is what we have here. COVID has given an excuse for more restrictions on us as business owners, more details that we have. And we say these other things existed, but small business was able to work on certain things. And now we look at some of the details in here, and I'm just asking, the minimum of award of $5,000, who added that? Where did the arbitrary number come from of a minimum of $5,000 if we did some of these things? You can't tell me employees don't see that. I'm just saying it will cause some problems.
You're exposed to that right now.
Yeah, well,
you're exposed to $7,000 right now. So this isn't anything new that you're not exposed to from a business standpoint.
So then that brings me to the bigger question then, is if these made things better and tighter and more restrictive and was better for all of us as business owners, my question then to you is, which we want to move past this, but I'm sure Tammy's got more questions about 6032. Where are the spokespeople for you? Where are the people that when this was in July, August, or even September or October when this is passed, are not going to a microphone and aren't saying to the people in a press conference or in just a briefing or on a Zoom like this to the people to say, here's what was existence before and here is what we've done. These are good things, because I got to tell you, when I'm looking at these comments, there are thousands of comments coming in right now. 90% of them are saying, get out of our business. Get out of our lives and let us operate. We cannot function. We're told we can't open. We're told how we have to open. We're told what we have to do when we open. And then we find after 4 months, it's all unconstitutional. I know you didn't do it. It's my frustration. I've got to pass this on to you for the people. They're voting tomorrow, but they are feeling strongly as if everything that you're doing is simply making things like a boot on our neck. And and when you do something that is better, and I believe a lot of what you did here intentionally is better, the problem is it's not conveyed to us. There's no messaging from you. You have the leadership in the House. You have the leadership in the Senate, and we do not hear from leadership at all. We hear nothing. The governor's in control. There's nothing we can do until a court reacts. And what happened? A court reacted and declared everything she did unconstitutional. And we immediately moved to, what can we do to agree with her? What can we do to move things forward? The problem is, it looks like we take 2 steps forward and maybe 1 step back, maybe 2 steps back. I am simply having to pass along the frustrations as a business owner, as an employee, as an employer, of what we're facing right now, the battle that we're facing. I just had banks. I had to renew a credit line. Guess what? They don't want to renew your credit lines. They don't want to deal with you anymore because they don't know what the government's going to do to my business or whether I'm even able to operate. And I know you're understanding, but you are in Lansing. And you have to understand the frustration of small business out here. And it is gotten to the point where literally, and I'm passing along some information that I don't need to, but I know I'm not alone in this, so you just have to hear me out. I lost my top salesperson a week ago. This morning, I found out that my top production person and my top designer for 7 years is leaving me in 2 weeks. Businesses are about to close up their doors, and we do not need any more restrictions. We do not need to be told what we have to do to survive. You got to get the hell out of the way. We can do things safely, but we have to be able to do something. And you know what? We can't do anything because I got to read this shit. I'm sorry. I've got to read this and decide who in the back room, who's the one person that might say, I got a stomach ache today, now I can't come in and do my job. Oh, guess what? I can't ship your product. We don't know what to do, people. And it isn't because of the virus. And my question is, for all of you, 99.99% chance of surviving if we get it. What is the number, people? What is the number that will allow us to be able to breathe? What is that number going to be? I'm asking you, for everyone out there that does not have an answer today, I'm with you. We know what we have to do in the election tomorrow. But by God, the people out here do not know what to do now. They don't have an answer. And it seems like I know the bills, I see the paperwork. What I want to hear from you is, where is the voice if you have the leadership? We hope that you maintain the leadership tomorrow because the alternative is horrible. It's worse than we have today. The repeal of 45 is gone. All these other things are gone. I understand. We have to vote. But you have to understand that when people see this and they don't have someone out front who's speaking on our behalf or on your behalf, speaking for us, explaining to us what's going on, we have to try and call you in here to explain it so that we can explain it for you going forward. It's because we have hundreds of thousands of people that don't know where else to go to get the information. We know the media won't pass it along. So I just want each of you to take this a little bit. I know you're dealing with businesses in your own jurisdiction, but I got to tell you from a personal standpoint, I'm at the top. I understand probably more than 95% of the people do, and I still don't know what to say. I can't even advertise for a new person for the ones leaving because I don't know that I can pay them. I've never been through something like this before. And I don't know where to turn, and I need at least leadership to tell us what your plan is, what you think we should be doing. And if you don't agree with it either, if all of us stand up to the tyranny, we can accomplish this together. We can say no. If we knew you had the strength behind you that you agree with us, then if 50% of us don't do it, then no one will be able to go, and there won't be any enforcement of this. But if only a few will do it and the rest will close their doors and lock them, then I don't know that we're going to recover as a state or as a country. I think it'll be too late. I see your little one sitting on your lap, Graham. That's who we're fighting for now. But if I can't support my kids and my grandkids, and I don't have an answer, I don't know where to go. And all I'm asking for is for you to communicate with us up front or at the time to tell us what you're doing and why you're doing it, because we don't read it and we don't hear about it.
I couldn't agree with you more, Ron, on all the frustrations out there. I personally lost a business years ago. It was one of the hardest things I've ever gone through in my life. I can't imagine all that's going on out there, especially if it was, frankly, the government destroying my business in front of my eyes. Something that my generations behind me had started, and then it disappeared in front of my eyes because of what the government did and said to me. So I hear what you're saying. It's very difficult to watch all this happen, dealing with the nursing home situations. And I don't want to get too far off on there, but it's a social worker just calling me and asking, can they just eat together? Can they just eat in a common room? And I know some of that's changed recently, but this is a month ago. To feel so helpless about what's going on around you. I know I believe I understand to some extent. You're right. There hasn't been a lot of communication. It could be better, needs to be better. These bills in particular, they did have 4 hearings in front of the Judiciary Committee, but that's really not very common knowledge. It's so difficult when we have press conferences and we don't get anybody there to listen to what's going on. There's so many different representatives that lay out each one of their votes individually. And I could name off a few different representatives, and those reasons are out there, they're public, they're on Facebook. But for some reason, we can't find that traction to get the message out there. We have this COVID Oversight Committee that digs into the unemployment issues, that digs into how these Democratic organization was allowed to get information from everybody through COVID, 6 months ago, that the governor hired this Democrat organization to come in and find this and get information from all these people. They just harvested the information. We have that in the COVID Oversight Committee, and we can't get boo out of that. It doesn't leave. It just seems like it just follows off into the ether and no one hears about it. We need to do a better job. I agree, Ron. I agree. We need to do a better job.
So who is the spokesperson, do you think, in the House that is going to be communicating to us? If we elect tomorrow and the House is maintained or we gain, and we've been working hard at Stand Up Michigan to maintain people that are going to protect our freedoms and our liberties, and when we read something like this a few days before, the frustration gets to be where people just feel like they're hopeless about some of this. And I understand that probably, more than a lot do. But how are we going to change the format so that we can communicate more regularly of what it is you believe? When you believe we need to stand up, I believe that our leadership needs to tell us to stand up. If you believe it's unconstitutional as leaders, you need to say so that the people will have the strength to stand up and deny what the media and the governor is telling us on a daily basis. Mainly because if we do stand up together, I believe that we can stop these things from happening because there won't be enforcement if 50% or 70% of our people say no more, like this giving our names and phone numbers when you go order a burger at a restaurant starting today, but yet you don't need to hardly identify who you are to vote. These things are craziness, and nobody, by the way, is much following this. But the question is, where does it all end? And all I'm asking for is there a way for us to work together better with you guys as we go to be able to say, hey, we're going to regularly have some communication. We're going to have a group of people, 4 or 5 of you from all sides of your house aisle that are going to come forward and give us your caucus's feelings on things. Because if we don't have that, we don't know where we stand. And I think in some ways, these last few months, we feel like your voice has been muted in a lot of ways.
I agree with what you're saying, Ron. You're not wrong. We do press conferences. The media never covers them. They'll cover anything Governor Whitmer does. She's on every single news show out there. She says something, they report it. We don't get that same treatment. Now, we know that, so it's not unsurprising. And we do need to do a better job of messaging. I mean, we have gotten just destroyed on the messaging front throughout this whole thing. And that's one of my weaknesses for sure, is I have not been a good messenger. And I don't know who that one person is on our side that's going to be that messenger. And I don't know if it's going to be an elected official or if it's your group, if that's a better way. That's something I don't know. And we need to do better on that front. As far as, I mean, you look at the contact tracing that they're trying to do today, you look at a lot of this, it's absolutely nuts what's going on. However, when we try to stop it, there is, as Republicans, we actually try to follow the constitutional system. And for us, as a legislative branch, what we can do is we can pass a bill. And when we pass it, the governor veto. We've had bills that the governor has vetoed that every single Democrat voted in favor of. When we go to override them, all of a sudden they change their votes and they won't override or veto. I mean, they will not go against their governor at all, which means we're in a very difficult position here of being able to actually rein in her power other than the courts. And unfortunately, the courts take months and months to reach a decision. The latest victory we got from the court was a huge victory. I mean, sure, what she does was truly unconstitutional, and yet it almost feels like things have gotten worse since that ruling. All of a sudden, now they're finding another place in law. All right, we're going to use the DHHS to do this. We're going to do contact tracing. It's not just the department that's doing it. They're making the business owners be the ones that have to enforce it, right? If you, the business, don't do this, now we're going to give you a fine. If you, the business, don't require masks, we're going to do the fine. I'm 110% opposed to that. But how do we stop that? And I wish there was a golden answer to do this.
It starts with our voices. It starts with us standing up together, and it takes our House of Representatives members who agree with us, and our senators have to stand up and say, we believe it's unconstitutional. And I believe that if they did do that, as you did in April 30th and moving into May, but you didn't voice it enough, because if you had, I believe more businesses and more individuals would have defied that. Just like they're going to defy this giving names and phone numbers, or not going to give real names and phone numbers when they go in if they're required to at all. It's all a bunch of crap. And I believe that the people want to know you're fighting for them. That's all. And I feel like I know the legal side of it, but now we look back and realize all the devastation that was created because we sat back and agreed. It would have had the same result had we not agreed. If you remember, Carl the barber never shut down, never quit cutting hair. And in the end, he had no fines, no nothing, and he operated his business. But so many people were in fear and followed it, and their businesses are closed forever. And I think in the same way with Bill 6032, they're opened up to legalities and issues here that are going to cause problems. The 10 days, the 14 days, all of these restrictions that are put in here are, if they're followed, are going to create major problems. The question is there real any enforcement capability? And if most of the people do not follow this, it won't be possible. But if the majority follow it, then there are going to be examples that are going to be set. And that's what happened before. So all I'm saying is, I think we've got to both win and prevail, but then we need to have a group of you standing up and saying, we agree with you, we don't agree with these regulations, but we can't have you passing bills that are going to make things almost like, well, wait a minute, let's look at your own bill. This is what you mandate in here according to your bill. that sometimes can cause a deeper problem, not unlike in April when you extended her emergency. I fought like heck for you not to extend the first time because the science and data wasn't there, but you did. Fortunately, thank God you didn't on April 30th. But the question is now we have the health department things. We did say, hey, the health department isn't there. She didn't have the 21 days, right? We argued about that. But so many people believe the media and believe what they're hearing. And I'm saying we have to find a way to communicate to our people that you stand with us in standing up. Because if we stand up as a large group of people for our constitutional rights and freedoms, not for a law that's made by man that isn't legal and we don't believe is right, then we can prevail together despite what law or tyranny comes upon us. And I know that individually a lot of you agree, but I think I've got to have a group of you stand behind me as I speak, or I've got to have somebody out in front of you speak and I'll stand behind you. But we have to do that regularly for our people in order for them to have the strength to stand up. And that's what I'd like to get from you as we go forward after tomorrow. And as we maintain the House, we have to know that you're not all the same, that you don't all agree with what the governor is doing, or it doesn't appear so because we're not speaking it. And I know you don't have a microphone all the time, but we're giving you one today. So I'm going to shut up and let you talk before we close up here.
Well, Ron, first off, I will always have your back when it comes to fighting for freedom. Anytime you want, myself, Graham, Luke, we'll always have your back there. I do want to touch on 6032. You represent a $5,000 fine. And look, I don't like that either, but it's important to know before this bill, MIOSHA, if you did not provide a safe workplace, which they would look at the CDC guidelines, and if you didn't follow that, they would determine that as an unsafe workplace. That is a $7,000 fine. So you may not like the $5,000 fine, but it's actually $2,000 less than the existing law. So I think that's where it's really important that you don't just read 6032 on its own, but consider it in scope of what was existing law already out there. I don't like that you're liable for all these lawsuits, but we at least got it to a point where you are less liable now than you were before. I would have liked the bill to have gone a lot farther, but I don't always get what I want. So I think that's the key to remember is when you read this and you see all the bad stuff in there, all that stuff that you are now liable for, you were always liable for.
So I think one of the things that I have been concerned about is putting permanent COVID requirements in place over cold and flu symptoms. And let me ask you a question. And I honestly don't know the answer to this, which is why I really wanted you guys to come on here and talk about this, because the citizens of Michigan have the same questions. So when I read this and I see that it is now law that if I have a headache, if I have a sore throat, if I have a stomach ache, which, could be from anything, it could be, diarrhea even, right? That could be from pregnancy. When I was pregnant, I had a headache and a stomach ache. I was nauseated for almost 9 months. If you read this bill, if I have 2 of these symptoms, I have a headache and I'm nauseated, I am precluded legally from coming to work for 10 days or until, these symptoms are gone, I test, negative for COVID or whatever. Then anybody around me, because of the MDHSS that we have to, that we now have to follow their requirements, because it says in here, this is why I was asking for the definition. What are the COVID requirements? Whose COVID requirements? And so that would be the Department of Health and Human Services, or MIOSHA, which we could argue that's a completely separate issue, that those 2 agencies are really rogue right now, that we shouldn't even be following what they're saying because they're so outside of their scope, it's not even funny. But what is this going to do when now, we live in Michigan, we have cold and flu seasons all winter long, we have muscle aches, we have headaches. Now legally I can't go to work for 10 days, and because I have to follow the COVID-19 requirements of the local, state, federal, which means Department of Health and Human Services and MIOSHA, that means contact tracing, because employees are having to follow their daily screening, daily check-in, so they know who's working around me in close proximity to me. Now those people have to be quarantined for 14 days. So what this is going to do, the burdens this is going to put on a workplace that are already dealing with severe labor shortages, this is what I'm saying. How do we undo what has just been put into place now permanently? Is there any way to undo this damage?
Yeah, so I want to address a few of those points there. You talked about maybe having some of these symptoms if you're pregnant. In the bill, it says, unless it's for a known, another known medical condition. So if that's the case, that you do not fall under this. Now, regarding the aspect of, hey, I came into contact with someone and now this says I have to quarantine for 14 days. I'm not allowed to go to work. That's not exactly what it does. When you read it, it does feel like that's what it's saying. But the important thing to note is there's no penalty on the employee if they don't do that. So what does that mean? Basically, what that means is in order for the employee to sue the employer, they would have to follow those steps. Now, if you decide you do not want to do that, you have that right. You have the ability to say, look, I'm not going to quarantine. I'm not going to do these things. However, by doing that, you have now forfeited your right to sue your employer. So I think that's the key takeaway there is a lot of people think, all right, now I have to go and get tested. And I have to go, if someone at Myers had COVID and I walked by on the aisle, now I have to go through all these steps. And that is not the case. You would have to go by those steps if you were to sue your employer for them firing you for not showing up to work because of COVID. So it's not, there is no penalty to you as an employee not to follow that. Now, your employer can require those things. Your employer always was allowed to require those things. But there's nothing from the government requiring that. It's just that you forfeit your ability to sue if you don't follow those. So that's actually
Okay.
for the employer.
Okay. Thank you for that. So I do have another question for you. What safeguards, if any, have you all thought about putting in place to offer us as business owners in exchange for the stipulations that you've just put on us? I mean, I know that you're saying that the reason that these requirements have been written into this 6032 were to protect us from liability from COVID, but this is going to be really a serious issue that business owners are going to have to deal with their employees. And it's going to affect our productivity. It's going to affect our ability to get our work done. We're going to be dealing with a lot less people in the workforce when we already have such a severe labor shortage that it's a serious issue. So are there any safeguards that you are, or measures that you are planning to take to put into effect to offset these drastic measures?
I think you're under those same the same pressure now, even before these laws. Is the main point we need to make sure comes through clear. You're under those same pressures now, even before these laws were passed, of employees being able to do these different things through MIOSHA standards, through DHHS standards. Are you suggesting financial support for businesses?
No.
No.
What have you thought about any other safeguards that you can take as far as legislation to protect business owners? Is this it? This 4-bill package, this was it, and we're moving on to other things? Or are there discussions right now in the House of safeguards that you can take to protect business owners from some of these measures and the fallout from these measures?
I think we're always open to more safeguards. How would you get the governor to sign?
Well, see, this is where I think, and Graham, I'd like you to address this too. I believe that you've got to begin passing some bills, whether she signs them or not, to represent the businesses and the people. If they sit there and they know you've passed a bill in the House that says we're not going to allow fines for people not wearing face masks, for instance, that's what other states have done. You can pass that. The Senate can pass that. That's what you do if you're in charge. Whether she signs them or not is irrelevant, meaning she can be on there, but it's your job to pass these bills of what you believe are right to protect us so that we know that your voice is written and it's in writing. I believe that there are other things that are safeguards you could pass, and then we can battle those in the courts. And we can also add those in, like you could have put in here that there won't be any fines for not wearing face masks, for instance, or whatever it is, into this package of bills. I don't believe if it was tied to unemployment insurance that she would have negated that either. I think the $500 and $1,000 fines are the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. Now, whether they'll ever be enforced, I don't know, but I believe that there are some things that you can do, like the nursing home situations, and you did pass that bill, and she vetoed it. That's fine. She was on record then, wasn't she? I think we have to put her a lot more on record, and you've got to do a lot more work to pass the bills that are the right thing to do, whether she will sign it or not, and not play to the polls. I'm saying this because we know that you followed the polls. I listened to House members and Senate members who specifically said, look, she's got 60% popularity. This is what we hear in the polls. We really don't want to bring these up because we've got some vulnerable seats.
Oh, you're
Yeah,
mute,
so
Ron.
obviously
I think you're
there's a
muted, Ron.
balance.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay.
Obviously, there's
I
a
agree.
balance. Sorry,
Go ahead.
Tammy, can you hear me? Right. So we play this balance all the time, and which is what this entire piece of legislation was. And we have passed things, and they have got vetoed. We passed a whole comprehensive state's response to COVID back in, I think it was April, and obviously it all got vetoed. And I mean, I think if you ask individual House members like Rep. Johnson and Rep. Meerman and myself, you know, we are out there, we are loud on our Facebook, sometimes Twitter, with our disagreement. And so it does pain me a little that, you know, folks who've reached out in the last week or so essentially have said things like, well, you're just as bad as the Democrats. And so, you know, let me tell you about the red flag laws that have not passed that, you know, that carve into your constitutional right to have a firearm. Well, they haven't passed because Steve and I are on House Judiciary, and we don't believe those are good bills. And so that's what you get out of a Republican House. So we do have a balance here. I should probably go feed my child lunch. So I do just want to dive in because Tammy gave me something good the other day when she says she's got some folks who've reached out who said, well, they don't know if they're going to vote or not. They don't know if they're going to vote conservative or Republican, and they're just, you know, they're a little confused out there because maybe they didn't like this bill, or maybe they're just upset. And what we found, first of all, is every time the governor does anything, not only are some of your folks mad at the governor, but they're upset at us. It's a reaction we can't control. And it's, I guess, the hard part of this job, because we have pushback, and we have pushback with a lawsuit, which ended up, along with the Mackinac Center, showing that her executive orders were unconstitutional. We did no fault reform, which never would have passed unless there was a Republican House or Republican Senate. It was a massive thing to cut down on corruption in the state of Michigan. We support right to work. We support agriculture. I can tell you the Dems don't support agriculture. We're very loud with our support of agriculture. We support law enforcement, which seems like a slam dunk that, you know, everyone would, but as we've seen, people don't. So, you know, maybe we need to do a better job messaging, but we're out there for a good year and a quarter before COVID hit, just sort of dominating the governor and pushing her into positions she didn't want to be at. And so, you know, if it takes more conversations with Ron and Tammy and the rest of your folks, then we're absolutely open to it. But the conversation in Lansing, the chatter was, man, that Republican House, you can't beat them up. They got 57 or 58 votes every time, and they can get things out. So I'm sure Rep. Johnson or Rep. Meerman might stay on for a little longer, but we are fighting. And maybe we need to be louder, but we are fighting. And we just I want to thank you for having me on. And any follow-up, you're just welcome to text
get with you
or
again,
bother
Graham,
us.
after the election. And once we do retain the House, then we're going to have some discussion of how we're going to get messaging out a little further and more in advance as we go forward. Okay.
Okay. There's just a thought. If and it's kind of joking, but if you don't like us, you're going to really hate the House Dems.
We understand,
because you've seen the legislation that they put in and how bad it is. And so
know,
we
and
just
we're
really
putting
want
it
to
out
put
every
that
day,
message
and
out
we
there, right?
understand. I think we'd just like you to be on the top of that roof with us screaming, rather than us having to pull you up the ladder and talk with us. So we'll do that after we get this done. Okay.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Graham.
Thank you, Graham.
Any final comments from Steve or Luke before we let you go? And then Tammy and I might stay on for just a couple more minutes.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll respond to Ron. I mean, I'm completely fine putting stuff on the desk and having her veto it. I see no issue with that. We have done some of that, and I think we should be doing more of it. However, to play devil's advocate, if people don't know where the governor stands on these issues now, I'm not sure if this is going to really change their mind. It's pretty blatant when you see the orders that she's putting down, where now you have to sign in order to go out to eat. I mean, it's just insane what they're doing right now. So I have no problem doing that. I think we should do more of it. However, I am skeptical of just how much that's going to actually change public opinion right now. And that's what we need to do. We need to be better at messaging and showing the general population that one side believes in tyranny, believes in government control of your life, and the other side believes in freedom. And that's what this is coming down to. This is an election of fear or freedom. What side do you want to be on? And with freedom, it can be scary. It doesn't always work out the best. It can be a little messy. But I will take freedom over government tyranny any day of the week. It has showed over and over and over again to be the best path to prosperity, to individual liberty, to just allowing religious liberties to thrive. Need to continue to choose freedom over fear. And right now, that's what tomorrow's election is going to be about. Whether it's Biden or Whitmer, they have made it very clear they want to shut down the nation in perpetuity. They want to tell people how to run their companies. They want to use this. Let's make no mistake. They're using COVID as their excuse to push through their agenda of items that they have always wanted. And they are doing it brilliantly. They are getting things they never would have dreamed of a year ago. And we have done a bad job of pushing back because we were reactionary. We were always on defense and never on offense. And they have done a better job of us at it. And we need to improve our efforts going forward. And tomorrow is the first key step to that. We need to show the population, show the Democrats too, that people want freedom and not fear. And I think that's what people are going to choose, but I'm not 100% sure. I really am worried that, if enough people stay home and the Democrats get enough people out, fear could win, which is a sad day for America if that is the case.
Well, I really appreciate that. And that is, you hit the nail right on the head. That is one thing. Ron's heard me say it. The people of Michigan have heard me say it. Our Stand Up Michigan group followers have heard me say many times. I have told my clients over and over and over that you've got to stay in a proactive position because then you're in control. The minute you find yourself in a reactive position, you have lost control and it's never good. And that is, I think, what has happened with all of this because it was not orchestrated from the Republican side of the aisle. It was orchestrated from the Democrat side of the aisle. So you guys have been in a reactionary position since day one. And then trying to figure out how you handle it and how you message all of this is just shooting from the hip. And that's, I think, what we have seen. And so my message, honestly, is not to beat you guys up. I wanted to hear some of these hard answers, and I know this was tough. But I really appreciate you and Luke and Graham coming on to be willing to answer these hard questions and to address, your current working environment and the situation that you guys are in, and that there's so much more going on behind the scenes than what people realize. And your willingness to just be vulnerable and answer the tough questions. And yet at the same time, use this as an opportunity to let people know, if you think this is bad, coming from the Republican side of the aisle, if you don't vote, that means you're giving a vote to the other side. Or if you vote for the other side thinking that, the Republicans are just as bad as the Democrats, then buckle up because you ain't seen nothing yet. So this election is critical, probably the most important election of our lifetime, maybe in history, to keep Republicans and conservatives. I shouldn't just say Republicans, I should just say conservatives. Those candidates who support freedom and our constitutional rights, even if this has been messy and not perfect and we're unhappy with some things, we need to move forward and we need to start strategizing about how you guys can become more proactive, keep yourself in a proactive position, not reactionary, not reactive. And it would be better for you to do nothing, to introduce no bills than to introduce bills that will take away our freedoms and liberties, the same thing as what they do, right?
Yeah.
It would be better for you guys to just say, we're not doing this. We're not going to go along with this, because now you have that on your record. And so we want to work with you. We want to help you and maybe give you a platform and a voice to figure out how we can better communicate, how we can take over and put ourselves in a proactive position so we're not reactive anymore. So I know this was tough, and I so appreciate your willingness to fight, because this is just part of a fight, right? Dealing with the good, the bad, and the ugly. And our goal is to get people out there voting for you.
But it's
Representative
time. It's
Johnson
time,
and
Tammy.
Mearman.
It is really time. You two are good examples, but I have to tell you, it is time for us to force you to stand up with us.
Yes.
You have an army behind you who wants
Yes.
to fight for liberty and freedom, and you spend a lot of time you listen to down there. I'm not talking about you two individually. We have got to make them stand up with us or get the hell out of our party if they don't stand up for what we believe in.
Absolutely.
Because we're going to come for those seats. We're going to change that. Elections have consequences, and we're going to demand that they actually read the bills instead of letting their staff read them, as we hear that so often happens. I'm not talking about you two individually, and these are all local elections, and we are praying for both of you to be reelected because you're both good, strong, patriotic Christian men. But you're also going to have to, again, scream from the rooftops with us and let us get the majority of those people on record making bills and putting statements out there that say that you stand with us, that you stand with the people. We, the people, are the solution. It is never going to be the government. And I believe that can happen when we get you reelected. We expect you guys to start getting behind us. I want to make sure when you elect your new leadership in the House, they are a person who's going to stand boldly and proudly with us, in front of us or beside us. But they're not going to be somebody who takes us for granted, because then the polls are really going to get bad and we're not going to gain anything. So all I'm asking you right now is let's get through tomorrow. Let's battle through that. But we need your voices when you get your leadership to make sure that leadership and that caucus is going to defend the freedoms and the rights and the liberties of every individual of the state of Michigan, because people all over this country and around the world are watching.
Yes. And then we can have you standing on the steps of the Capitol with us, beside us, and we will be your press conference.
Yes, we will. Anything, Luke, before we go?
I just want to thank everybody that's been listening, watching, being involved. Everybody knows that there has never been a time like this when people's lives were turned upside down by the power of government. And my one hope and dream when I leave office is that people have a greater appreciation for their liberty and freedom, and they know how quickly they can disappear, and they know how to fight for them. And so all those that are listening and watching again, there's an army here, and I so appreciate everyone who cares. Stay involved, keep involved. Just understand that I was standing behind Democrats wanting to drop bills to have abortion on demand the day of the baby born. I mean, very radical things like the Virginia legislature has done. That's what we're trying to hold back here, and I just would greatly appreciate all your support to do that.
Okay, thank you both. I appreciate
Absolutely.
it. We'll talk to you after the election tomorrow, and we're going to hold accountability for all of you to represent all of us, because we're out here. We're fighting for it.
And we're fighting for you guys. Thank you both so much for being willing to come on and take the heat and up the ante and keep fighting the good fight.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm actually coming in to see if I can get do you have a phone charger by chance?